My daughter-in-law set a plate in front of me and smiled like she was doing me a favor. That's when I knew. Not because she'd never been kind before. She had. In the performative way, some people are kind. The kind that comes with an audience and disappears the moment the room empties. But that smile was different. Too wide, too patient. The kind of smile you give someone when you already know how the evening ends. It was Easter Sunday. The table was set beautifully. I'll give her that. Linen napkins, the good china, tulips in a low vase so nobody's view got blocked. My son Vernon had been cooking since noon, which was unusual enough on its own. Vernon hadn't cooked a proper meal since he was in college making ramen at midnight. But there he was in my kitchen. My kitchen, the one I'd lived in for 31 years, wearing an apron and acting like it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd made lamb, my favorite. He said, "Mom, I braised it specially for you, the way Grandma used to make it." His grandmother had been dead for 22 years. Vernon hadn't mentioned her name in at least 10 of them. I looked at the lamb on my plate. Rich, dark, the sauce pooled around the edges the way it does when someone's been tending it properly. It smelled right. It looked right. And his wife Gina was watching me from across the table with that smile still fixed in place. Hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a performance to begin. I thought about Gina's mother, who I'd heard more than once call me a lot to handle. And I thought about the envelope Vernon had pressed into my hands 2 weeks before Easter. "Just some paperwork, Mom. Nothing complicated." I picked up my fork. Then I put it down. "Vernon," I said, "I just remembered I forgot to take my blood pressure pill this morning. Can you get me a glass of water?" He went to the kitchen, and while he was gone, I switched my plate with his. He came back, set the water down, sat, and for a fraction of a second, just a flicker, he looked at his plate and something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, something closer to recalculation. "You took my seat," Gina said, laughing softly, already reaching for her wine. "Sorry," I said, force of habit. I always sat here when it was just me and Howard. Nobody argued. Howard had been gone 4 years. Nobody argues with a widow about where she sits at her dead husband's table. We ate. I watched. About 40 minutes into the meal, Vernon pushed his plate aside and said he wasn't hungry. Stomach felt off. He waved it away like it was nothing, too much tasting while cooking probably. Gina rubbed his arm. I sipped my water. That night I sat in the kitchen after they'd gone home and I let myself think the thing I hadn't wanted to think. Not yet. Not until I had more. I didn't sleep much. I lay in Howard's old spot on the left side of the bed because I still haven't broken the habit of the right, and I stared at the ceiling and went back over the last year the way you run your tongue over a sore tooth. Slowly, carefully, looking for the exact shape of it. Vernon had started coming around more about 14 months after Howard passed. That seemed right at first. Grief has a delayed reaction sometimes, and I thought he was finally feeling the loss, finally needing his mother the way adult children sometimes do when they realize parents aren't permanent. I was glad to have him. I made him coffee. I listened to his plans. He had a lot of plans. A business idea involving real estate in some market he described as heating up fast, Mom. I just need initial liquidity. A friend with a startup needing investment. A rental property he and Gina wanted to purchase that would basically pay for itself if I could co-sign. I didn't co-sign, but I did write a check for $8,000 when he told me his car had been totaled and insurance was taking months to settle. I wrote another for $3,000 when Gina had a dental emergency. I wrote a smaller one around Christmas, just because he looked tired and said things were tight. It never occurred to me to stop trusting him. He was my son. I'd held him when he was 3 days old and screaming, when he was 12 and scared, when he stood at Howard's graveside and finally let himself cry. I knew every version of his face. But that face at the dinner table, that flicker. I got up at 2 a.m. and went to the filing cabinet in Howard's old office. The envelope was still there, still sealed where I'd left it after skimming the cover page. I'd meant to read it properly and kept putting it off. I'm not sure what I was avoiding exactly. Maybe I already knew something and didn't want to name it. I read every page. It was a durable power of attorney, full authority over my finances, my property, and decisions regarding my care if I were found to be mentally incapacitated. Vernon's name was on every line that mattered. My signature was at the bottom, slanted and rushed the way my handwriting gets when I'm distracted or trusting. I remembered the night he brought it over. There'd been a whole dinner first. Takeout Thai, which I love. He'd been funny and warm, more like the son I raised than the one I'd been navigating lately. And at the end of the evening, he'd set the envelope on the table like an afterthought. Just protective paperwork, Mom. Howard would have wanted this. I nodded. I signed. I let him take it home before I'd finished reading. I sat there at 2 a.m. in Howard's office chair and I thought about the lamb. If I'd eaten it, if whatever was wrong with it had made me sick, confused, vomiting, disoriented, I would have gone to a hospital. And if the hospital had found me confused, mentally unfit, well, there was already a document ready. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I thought they would. I got up, made tea, and wrote down everything I remembered from the last 14 months, dates where I could approximate times, dollar amounts. I wrote until the window went gray with early light, and then I called my doctor's office and left a message asking for the earliest available appointment. Then I called my granddaughter. Petra is 20. She's in her second year at the state university 3 hours away, studying nursing, and she has her grandfather's eyes and my stubbornness. She's the kind of person who picks up on the first ring even at 6 a.m. and doesn't say, "What's wrong?" She just says, "I'm here." "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I need you to just listen first." She listened. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then, "Grandma, I have to tell you something too." She'd been home for spring break the week before Easter. She'd been downstairs when her father and Gina arrived early to start cooking. And at some point, she'd gone to get something from the kitchen and stopped in the hallway because her father was on the phone. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she heard him say, "It only needs to look like confusion, enough to get the evaluation started. Once she's flagged, the rest follows." She hadn't known what to do with it. She'd told herself, maybe she'd misheard, that it was probably about work, about something she didn't understand. She'd been telling herself that for a week. "You didn't mishear," I said. She went quiet. "Then I should have called you right away." "You're calling me now," I said. "That's what matters." We talked for another hour. I asked her not to say anything to her father yet, not to anyone. Just for a little while. She agreed, but her voice was tight with something she was working hard to hold in check, and I loved her for that. By 9 that morning, I was in the office of my attorney. Frank Bellamy had handled my affairs for 15 years. Dry humor, wire-rimmed glasses, always a yellow legal pad. He'd drawn up Howard's will with us, revised it twice, and settled the estate afterward. He was not a man who startled easily. He startled a little when I put the POA on his desk. He read it through once, then again. Then he took off his glasses and cleaned them, which is what he does when he needs a moment. "Did you understand the scope of this when you signed it?" he asked. "No," I said. "I trusted my son." He nodded, not with pity, with something more businesslike than that. Recognition, maybe. He'd seen this before. We spent 2 hours going through options. He explained what a durable POA meant in practical terms, what my son could legally do with it, what I could do to stop it. By the time I left his office, I had a formal revocation drafted and signed, a referral for a notary, and an appointment the following morning to discuss establishing an irrevocable trust. "Before you go," Frank said at the door, "do you have someone you trust completely? Someone whose judgment is sound and whose loyalty isn't in question?" I thought for less than a second. "My granddaughter," I said. He nodded. "Then let's talk about her tomorrow." The bank was my next stop. The branch manager, a careful woman named Pat, pulled at my accounts while I sat across from her with my coat still on. It took her about 4 minutes to find the standing transfer I hadn't authorized. $500 monthly, outgoing, to an account in Vernon's name, categorized as property maintenance, which was interesting since I had no property Vernon was maintaining. How long? I asked. 11 months, she said. I did the math. $5,500, moved quietly out of my savings while I made him coffee and listened to his plans. I need that stopped today, I said, and I need every authorization on this account removed except mine. She moved quickly and efficiently and didn't ask unnecessary questions, which I appreciated. Before I left, I asked for a full year of statements printed and ready. I drove home the long way, past the park where Howard and I used to walk on Sunday mornings before his knees got bad. The tulips were just coming up along the path. He would have noticed that. He noticed things like that. At home, I spread the bank statements across the kitchen table and read them the way I used to read legal briefs in the years I worked as a paralegal line by line. Nothing skipped. There were other things I hadn't authorized. A charge to an online legal service. A withdrawal I couldn't trace. A transfer I vaguely remembered being told was just a short-term float. I made a second list, put it in the folder with the first one. Vernon called at 5:30 that evening, twice. I watched his name on the screen and let it go. The third time, I picked up. Mom, the bank called me. I know, I said. What's going on? They're saying my transfer was canceled. Yes. A pause. I don't understand. That was it was unauthorized, I said. So I removed it. His voice shifted. Not to anger yet, to the careful tone men use when they're recalibrating. Mom, I think you might be confused about what we discussed. I'm not confused, I said. I know exactly what we discussed, and a standing transfer of your account is not part of it. You're getting upset about nothing. I'm not upset, I said, which was true. I was something steadier than upset. I'm making decisions about my own money, which is my right. That's all. He said he'd come over. I told him that wasn't necessary. He said we needed to talk in person. I told him we were talking right now. He showed up anyway, 45 minutes later with Gina. She stayed in the car. He came to the door, and I met him there without opening the screen. He looked tired. Or he was performing tired. I couldn't tell which anymore, and that was one of the saddest things I'd ever thought about my own child. Mom, I'm worried about you. I know you are, I said. Since Dad passed, you've been, I don't know, off, forgetting things. Gina and I have both noticed. I'm sure you have, I said. I'm just saying, this POA was to protect you. That's all it was ever about. I looked at him through the screen for a moment. He was 51 years old. He had Howard's jaw and my father's height. And somewhere inside him there was still the boy who used to fall asleep in the car and have to be carried in, heavy and warm and trusting. I had loved him without condition for 51 years. I've revoked the POA, I said. I've spoken to Frank Bellamy, and tomorrow I'm setting up a trust. You should know that. He stared at me. And Vernon? I paused. The Easter dinner. I know. He didn't say anything, but something moved across his face. Something that wasn't anger or denial. Something smaller and less definable. Something closer to caught. Go home, I said. And don't come back here without calling first. I closed the inner door. I stood in the dark hallway for a minute and listened to him go down the porch steps and get into the car. I listened to them drive away. Then I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The next morning, Frank had a proposal ready. We set up an irrevocable trust funded with my savings account, my investments, and a portion of the house equity. I named Petra as sole beneficiary and co-trustee once she turned 21, 8 months away. Until then, Frank's firm would serve as neutral co-trustee. Anyone who contests the trust or files to challenge your mental competence without merit, Frank said, forfeits any claim. Put that in, I said. It's already in. I signed everything slowly. My hand was steady. Afterward, I went back to the bank and opened a new account in the trust's name. I moved funds. I closed the joint authorization completely and added a flag to my file. In-person verification required for any account changes. No phone, no online. They noted it without comment. On my way home, I stopped at the college library where I used to volunteer on Tuesday afternoons before Howard got sick, and I stopped going everywhere for a while. The librarian, a tall, quiet man named Frank's age, with a cardigan collection I'd always admired, looked up from the circulation desk and said, "Mrs. Alderman, it's been a while." And I sat down at one of the reading tables and just breathed for a few minutes, surrounded by books and the smell of old paper and people reading quietly. Nobody needing anything from me. Nobody watching my hands. It helped. Petra drove down that weekend. She arrived Friday evening with her backpack and her laptop and the particular set to her shoulders that means she's been holding something for too long and needs to put it down. She sat at my kitchen table and I made her the same grilled cheese I'd been making her since she was 4, and we talked until midnight. She'd been thinking about the phone call she'd heard her father make. She'd written down what she could remember, word for word. "We should document it," she said. "I already have," I said. She showed me what she'd written on her phone, the notes she'd taken the morning after Easter when everything was still fresh. The exact words, the tone, the context. We went through everything together. The bank statements, the POA, the checks I'd written. She was steady through all of it, didn't flinch, didn't minimize, just looked at the facts with those clear eyes. "I want to do something," she said at one point, not angry, just determined. That particular kind of quiet that in our family usually precedes something that can't be undone. "Not yet," I said. "I need a little more." She nodded. She trusted me, and that trust was the most valuable thing I'd been given in years. 2 weeks passed. Vernon texted twice, brief and careful. Gina called once, left a voicemail I didn't return. A certified letter arrived from an attorney I didn't recognize. 2 paragraphs expressing concern about my recent erratic behavior and financial decisions, and suggesting a voluntary cognitive assessment. I read it, folded it, placed it in my folder. Then I called Frank. "They're escalating," he said. "I expected that. I want to file a protective order," he said. "And I think you should consider making a statement to Adult Protective Services first before they contact them. Get your account on record." "Yes," I said. I was already going to. That afternoon, I went to the APS office and gave a written account of everything. The POA, the unauthorized transfer, the Easter dinner and what I suspected about it, the phone call Petra had overheard, the caseworker, a woman in her 40s who had seen all of this before and carried that knowledge carefully, took notes and asked measured questions and didn't suggest that I might be misremembering or overreacting. "Do you feel safe in your home?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I feel safer than I have in over a year." She filed the intake. She told me they would be in contact. I drove home in the late April light, the trees just starting to fill in along the highway, that pale green that only lasts a week before it deepens into summer. Howard used to say that color was God showing off. I'd always disagreed and then thought about it later and come around. That evening, Petra called from her dorm. "Grandma," she said, "I think you should know something." She'd spoken to a friend whose mother was an ER nurse. She described the Easter symptoms, the way Vernon had felt sick 40 minutes into the meal, the nature of it, the timing, just in general terms, not naming names. The friend had asked a few questions and then said, based on that description, it sounded consistent with a moderate ipecac exposure, enough to cause nausea and vomiting, not dangerous in the short term to a healthy adult, but to an older woman with multiple allergies and a history of cardiac issues. I sat with that for a while. "It's not proof," Petra said carefully. "No," I said, "but I know what I know." I called Frank that night. I told him about the ER nurse's assessment. He listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do. "I think it's time," he said, "to talk to the police." "I think so too," I said. I went the next morning. The officer who took my report was thorough and unhurried. I gave him the folder. All of it, the documents, the bank statements, Petra's written account, the lawyer's letter. He made copies of everything. He said it would be entered as a protective record pending further inquiry and that depending on the medical assessment, it could move into criminal territory. "Does your son know you're here?" he asked. "He will," I said. The call came that evening. Vernon, not Gina. His voice was different this time. The careful tone was gone. "What did you do?" "What I should have done earlier," I said. "You went to the police." "Mom, you've lost your mind." "You actually think I tried to hurt you?" "I think you made a decision," I said, "that had consequences you weren't prepared for. And I think you've been making decisions about my life without my knowledge for a long time, and that's over now. This is going to destroy this family." "You started that," I said, "not me." He was quiet. "Then, what about Petra?" There it was. "Petra told the truth," I said. "That's all she did. If you have a problem with that, you'll have to work it out with her yourself, but understand this, she's not a pawn, and she's not available to be one." He hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward. The house was quiet. The evening light came through the window at that low, late afternoon angle that always makes the kitchen look golden. It used to make me happy. For the last 4 years, it had mostly made me lonely. Tonight, it just looked like light. A month later, the investigation was ongoing. Vernon's attorney had sent 2 more letters, both asserting my mental incompetence, both answered by Frank with documentation that increasingly embarrassed their position. The cognitive evaluation request filed through a third party had been reviewed and closed, insufficient grounds. I had started volunteering at the library again, Tuesday afternoons. I'd taken a watercolor class on Thursday mornings that I wasn't very good at but liked more than I expected. I'd called 2 friends. I'd led drift since Howard died, and one of them had come over for dinner, and we'd stayed at the table until 10 o'clock. Petra visited the first weekend of May. She brought her sketchbook, and we sat on the porch in the late afternoon. She showed me what she'd drawn over the semester, mostly studies of hands, which she said was a nursing thing, learning to look at them carefully. One page was different. An older woman standing by a window looking out with her back mostly turned. Not sad, not performing anything, just standing there, present. "Is that me?" I asked. She smiled a little. "Maybe. Is that okay?" I looked at it for a while. "It's good," I said. "She looks like she knows where she is." "She does," Petra said. We stayed on the porch until the light went. The street was quiet. A neighbor walked his dog. Someone a few houses down was grilling, and the smell of it drifted over, and I didn't mind. It was ordinary, and for a long time, ordinary had felt like something I was on the outside of. Looking in through other people's kitchen windows at lives that had someone in them. This was my porch, my street, my life. I hadn't lost it. I'd nearly let it be taken. There's a difference. Vernon had left 3 voicemails in the past 2 weeks that I hadn't returned. I didn't hate him. I had tried to hate him and couldn't quite get there, which maybe said more about me than about him. He was my son. He had made choices that I would spend a long time finding words for, but he was also the person I had once rocked to sleep in a house much smaller than this one, singing the same 3 songs because those were the only 3 I knew, and neither of those things canceled the other out. I just wasn't going to let love be the thing that kept me from protecting myself. That was the mistake I'd made, and I was done making it. I had told Petra the trust was in her name. She'd gone very still, the way she does when something lands harder than she expected. "I don't want you to think about it as an inheritance," I said. "Think about it as what I'm handing you instead of a problem." She'd looked at me for a long time. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I want to earn it." "You already did," I said, "the morning you called me." That evening, after she'd gone back to school, I walked to the house slowly, not looking for anything, just being in it. The kitchen where I'd made 30 years of dinners. The hallway with the water stain near the baseboard that Howard kept meaning to fix. The bedroom where I still slept on my right side. I opened Howard's office and stood in the doorway. I hadn't changed anything. His books were still on the shelves, his old clock still on the desk, the photograph of us from our first trip to Maine in 1987 still propped against the lamp. "Well," I said to no one. Then I went and made myself dinner, and I ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on, and it tasted exactly like what it was, mine. I've been thinking about the word trust a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just the ordinary, everyday version of it. The kind you extend without thinking, the way you extend your hand when someone offers to help you carry something heavy. You don't stop to analyze it. You just let go. That's what I did with Vernon for a long time. I let go. I handed over my signature, my savings, my willingness to question, and I called it love. I think a lot of mothers do. We confuse the two because we taught ourselves early on that love meant giving without measuring, and somewhere along the way that got twisted into something that cost me more than I want to add up. What I know now is this: the moment I put down my fork at that Easter table, something shifted. Not dramatically. There was no thunder, no revelation, just a quiet, practical decision made in a fraction of a second. And that small decision, switching a plate, saying nothing, watching, turned out to be the one that saved everything I had left. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in a punishing way, not sitting around tallying up who wronged whom, more like every choice has a weight, and eventually the scale tips. Vernon made choices that accumulated over 14 months, small ones at first, the kind you can explain away, and then larger ones that couldn't be undone. And I made a choice too, for years, to look the other way, because looking directly at it meant accepting something I didn't want to accept about my own child. The price of that avoidance was $5,500 and a document that could have cost me everything. That's the honest accounting. What Petra did, picking up the phone at 6 in the morning, telling me what she'd heard even when she wasn't sure she should, that came from something she'd built in herself long before that morning. She'd paid attention. She'd told the truth even when it was complicated. Those aren't instincts you're born with. They're habits you form, one small, honest moment at a time. I'd like to think I had something to do with that. I'd also like to think she did most of it herself. Both things can be true. What I've come to understand, sitting on my porch in the evenings now with something closer to peace than I've felt in years, is that intelligence without honesty is just a tool for getting what you want. And strength without integrity eventually turns on the people who trusted it. Vernon is smart. He always was. But he used that intelligence in service of something small and grasping, and the result was that he lost his mother, his daughter's trust, and whatever version of himself he might have been if he'd made different choices. I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing, and I think that's worth saying clearly. For anyone who's sitting somewhere right now, wondering if it's too late to put down the fork and pay attention to what's actually in front of them, it isn't. It wasn't for me at 67, alone in a house that felt too quiet, still sleeping on the wrong side of the bed. You don't need a dramatic moment, you just need one clear-eyed second. Then, you act on it.